Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your host, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing for the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, we're going to be focusing on a critical component of any art application, which is the letter of intent. And now they may be referred to different things, maybe a letter of intent, maybe a letter of interest, maybe just any other formal write-up with an application. But either way, they are a vital part of seeking opportunities that require written applications.
Yeah, and some of the things we're going to discussing, some of them may talk about impact statements or may just ask for a cover letter. Some applications don't need any of what we're talking about, which is great, but a lot of them, especially some of the higher dollar opportunities, some of the public art calls, some of the grants, they're going to require something along these lines where you're just not just showing what your artwork looks like, but they want you to give them a little bit more, right? Sometimes, and both Jackie and I have been jurors in previous opportunities, sometimes when you have a jury panel looking through all the different artists that applied, you're going to have a lot of great applicants, and sometimes it comes down to the written material they submitted with their application to help narrow it down further. So it's one of those, maybe they won't look at it, but you have to prepare yourself for if they do, because a lot of times that is going to be the more impactful, like, let's say first impression might be the image itself, but the second most important impression is probably going to be your written material. So you just want to make sure, your images can be great, but if you're having a hard time kind of what's the word I'm looking for, articulating why you should be the person to do the job, then that could be something that could count against you. So we're not going to talk about like, hey, you have to have like the most perfect letter of intent or letter of interest or, whatever it's called, but it's definitely important to know what some of the components are, try to make it as compelling as possible. This is what can make the difference between standing out or blending again with a whole bunch of like super talented people, but it's definitely something you want to, you want to put some work into it. This is one of those, and you've heard us say this before because we've been guilty before of this, of like, this is one of those things you always want to look at the applications that you are interested in as far in advance as you can. We're not saying you have to fill it out months in advance, but doing it the day of and finding out you have to do a meaty letter of intent, ooh, and it's due in a few hours, that's a lot more pressure than anybody really needs to go through. So anyways, at least look at them in advance, and then we can figure it out. A few of the things that we're going to go into, and we're going to go obviously into more details, but a few things to throw out there is a good letter of intent is brief, it's to the point, it's filled with just enough information to pique the interest of the jury or the panelists or the decision makers, depending on who you're putting your proposal to. And depending on what kind of opportunity this is and how many applicants they're accepting, keep in mind they might have to read a lot of these, right? So if everybody's using the same copy paste from ChatGPT, it's going to get lost in the noise, right? They might just cause you to tune out, especially if you go into too much of a micro detail. Literally, this is almost, I don't want to say it's as salesy as an elevator pitch, if you guys have heard that expression, but in a way, it kind of is like you are self-promoting yourself. You are trying to say, I am the right person for this. So you need to come across as professional and to the point, and then they decide. Then it's up to them, right? If you're the right person or not based on their goals.
Exactly. And for many artists, this is that first impression for an opportunity. So, in today's episode, we're going to be unpacking what exactly should be included in this letter. Obviously, it is not an exact science by any means. However, after speaking with several professional artists, art professionals who are on the jurying and evaluating side of the table, we've realized key elements that you need to really be successful in writing these letters. So, super simple breakdown would be, of course, having an introduction, a project interest statement, then an experience statement, talking about your qualifications, and then a conclusion. So we're going to unpack each of those sections in our episode today. So let's go ahead and dive in. First and foremost, off the bat, introduction, of course. Not just diving into the meat of the conversation at the first sentence, but you want to introduce yourself. Give the reader a general idea of who you are, what kind of artist you are, maybe mention the general theme of your work and your experience with previous public installation art at a very surface level in the introduction. So you may say, I am a blank artist who creates blank work and explores the themes of blank, blank, and blank, right? It gives a super general overview of, okay, that quick one sentence elevator pitch of who you are and what you do that then influences the rest of your letter.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these things that we're talking about, this is like one or two sentences. These are not paragraphs. So stay with us. I know it may sound like, how much are we writing here? It's not an essay, we promise.
Mhm.
Most of them, the shorter the better. Although, before we keep going into this, do keep in mind they will specify a lot of times if there's a character limit, or whether there's a minimum word count or maximum word count. So do keep an eye on that. You don't want to be disqualified because they asked for a 2-minute read and you gave them a 20-minute read or a 30-second read, you know? So anyways, keep an eye on that. But the different sections we're explaining, we're looking at, 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences. Like project interest is one of them. So this is the part you've already introduced yourself, said hello, this is the part where you're actually explaining why you're the best choice for this project, in your humble opinion, please. So read the call carefully, lean into that emotional language of the call, pull buzzwords and use them in your statement. So a lot of times they will say, okay, this project, we aim to have the community involved and ecological and nature resources, blah blah blah, of this project by this university, whatever that is. See what you have in there, and we're not saying like copy paste the whole thing. Thesaurus is also your friend, please. But definitely like pick from them like the most important nuggets, and make sure that when you're saying I'm the good fit for this, you are taking into account what kind of artist they're looking for, what kind of art are they're looking to make. And if it doesn't resonate at all, like I mean, that's gonna look a little off, right? Especially if you're using tentative language, like maybe I could, I haven't done this before, but maybe if I get the chance. No, we're trying to strike the balance of all these between like approachable but also assertive, but also humble. I mean, it's a delicate balance, but it's not like second guessing yourself every other, sentence, right? You got to come off as strong, right? As a confident applicant. So you want to cast that vision. You don't necessarily want to keep it too hard. I mean, it's okay to put a little bit of suggestion on there, like
Mhm.
I may do this. I mean, nobody wants you to say, like, I have to be the one because you absolutely need me. Again, please, a little humility sprinkled in there is chef's kiss. Yeah, but you're looking at kind of like that balance of like, yes, I know that I can, or I am capable of. I would love to have the opportunity to do, blank, blank, blank. I have a team that's like would support me in the execution of this thing. Or we have if you're applying as a team, right? And this is in the intent, we have a combined experience of however many years. Like lean into those things, which again, you're just trying to say like, hey, like as if you were meeting them face to face, I am the one for this, but also humble. Like I'm not all that in a bag of chips either. Like that's not the approach, people. That's not the approach.
Yeah, and I think the key with that in terms of that project interest statement, that 2 to 3 sentences, is casting that vision, as you said, Adriana, but also keeping it somewhat flexible in terms of if they want to give more input on what the final project could be, right? So not committing too hard to this is the only way possible that it could be, take it or leave it, but still obviously being approachable, confident in what you're suggesting, but also making them realize that, of course, you are confident in your abilities, you're confident in your interest in wanting to do this project, But avoid trying to really focus on why this project would be a good fit for you, and instead tell them why you are a good fit for the project. You don't necessarily want to focus on, oh, well, I've done murals of 30-foot scale so far, and therefore a 50-foot scale mural is the perfect opportunity for me to grow my career. I'm sure they're very supportive of the artists that are applying for this, but they don't really care about advancing your career, right? They want to know, will you deliver a good project for us? So focusing on how your experience will lead you to be the right applicant for them. Which really lends to the next section after you talk about your interest in the project, and why you're the best fit for it. Backing that up with 1 to 2 sentences of what your experience is. So maybe you describe a recent project, or projects that are relevant to this one. If you've done a handful of murals recently that were outdoors in public areas, talk about that. Explain how each of those projects was similar or related in terms of, was the same size, was there a similar budget, maybe a similar theme. Maybe it involved a community engagement aspect where you involve the community in the creation of the project. Talk about that if that's a requirement for this opportunity. And really be able to cite those examples of exactly what you've done previously that will also be required in this project will just lower their bar, and kind of trust you that, oh, well, they've done it before, so they can do it again. But there's also technical aspects, like if you've used scaffolding before, if you've used lifts before, if you have experience working exterior in ladders or interior in a business, making sure that you really lay it out for them. Or if you feel like you don't have that experience, you can draw parallels between maybe other projects you've done, other professional experiences you've done, or really lean into those softer experiences. Maybe, let's say it's public art, for example. If you don't have that many projects under your belt, you can emphasize your community engagement on different projects before, or talking to individuals at market and getting feedback on your artwork could then help you talking to community members and getting feedback on a mural. If you've done any painting in public projects, whether it was a mural or whether it was just a live painting event, these are all kind of softer parallels that aren't exactly the experience, obviously, but you can still draw that connection as to, okay, it's not a total stretch. I'm not just applying or for this opportunity out of the blue. There are some tie-throughs because they obviously don't know you. They don't know those soft skill connections. Um, and those are things you can lean into if you're still gaining the technical experiences under your belt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, don't be afraid to say, like, I've assisted other artists in projects, or I was the co-lead on this, or the team lead on that. So even if you're the second in command or part of the army of volunteers, it doesn't matter. Use that. They just want to show that, or you want to show them that you have been able to participate in projects, whether you were the lead or you were supporting the lead, and you showed professionalism and you got it done. That's their big thing, is they want to give you an opportunity, especially if it's money. They want to know that you are going to deliver on your promise, which leads me to next sentence that I feel goes very well after you talk a little bit about your experience, which again is just a few sentences, is qualification. So trying to create a tie-in between you, the site or location, or maybe a tie-in between you and the target audience. So let's say, for example, you are doing this for a nonprofit that helps, I don't know, disadvantaged folks of a certain group, right? Let's say it's like, I don't know, a house for battered women and children, which is, of course, super sad. So let's say that you know somebody that went through that and you have volunteered for them before, and this is another center that does something similar or is in the same sphere. Then you might be like, hey, I did a project for the women's shelter, and let's say this opportunity is for a different kind of recovery program, also for women. Then you can do that tie-in. It's not that
Mhm.
far. You have worked for nonprofits that are helping folks that are trying to get back on their feet, right? So you kind of make that tie-in. That's one way to do it. Another one could be like if you have a relationship with the site or the location. Hey, I grew up going to the school, or growing up to this in this district, or whatever the case may be, or like I grew up painting that statue in front of your building. Whatever you can find, right? That's in there. Biggest thing I would throw in here is don't be us. Please don't be us. If you it always comes out. It's great to present yourself as like the great best candidate, but keep it straight. Keep it honest. Don't try to don't put too much flair. Is what I mean to say with that. A little flair, not too much flair. Also with that, once you've kind of done the tie-in, then that's when you go into your conclusion. And conclusion is normally one sentence, give or take, but this is where you're stating your excitement about the project and you want to thank the decision makers for reading your application. And an example of that could be like, oh, if granted this project, I would create large, abstract, botanical, colorful murals that brighten the space for the community members that, go to the space, blah, blah, blah. Thank you for your time and consideration, something like that. Again, keep the humble element in there, but you're not like, if maybe, could you maybe please? It's more like, hey, I'm ready for this. I'd love to. If I get the chance, here's what my like overall plan is. Here's the wrap up, which a lot of times this ends up being similar to like the first few sentences that you're doing, but you're trying to wrap it up in that one sentence. If that's the only thing they read, let that be the one, right? Where you're just like, boom, here it is. Now get back to me, please.
Exactly, exactly. And so simply broken down, that's really it. Oftentimes, letter of intent or statement of interests is a page or less, but really breaking it down into these tangible pieces will ensure that you hit all of those components. So 1 or 2 sentences as your introduction, 2 to 3 sentences sharing why you are interested in the project, but also why you are a good fit for this project. 1 or 2 sentences talking about your experience, equivalent projects that you've worked on that maybe emphasize the equipment skills, technical skills, or softer skill experiences that make you a good fit. 2 to 4 sentences about your qualifications, maybe your connection with the space or the target audience, and then a conclusion statement to wrap it up. And when you really make it more of a formula like this, it can make writing these letters a lot less intimidating because you know that you hit each of those boxes of what they're looking for. But up next, we're going to talk about our top 3 tips for creating a leveled up letter of intent. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist courses.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there. So what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold, so you don't have to waste your time going down those endless rabbit holes.
In addition to weekly calls, we have created video course modules to cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, artist mindset, PDF resources, templates, and so much more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your career today. Welcome back, everyone. So as we wrap up, we want to give you 3 tips for putting the finishing touches on your letter of intent. So before you hit submit, you get really excited and you're just looking forward to this opportunity. Slow down and take a moment to do these 3 things. The first one, of course, being to proofread it. Make sure that every phrase is clear, every phrase and word has an intended purpose, and just that the overall tone is professional. And of course, spelling, grammar, the basics of proofreading as well.
Yeah, feel free to use. This is something I think where ChatGPT and equivalents are really, really good. Like if you are just spitballing thoughts and are having a hard time kind of putting this together, those sites I would definitely say don't copy paste as it comes out, honestly. That's just me. But it could be a good where you can say, can you proofread for clarity and professionalism? Literally how Jackie just said. And it will actually come back and you can ask it to give you specific edits. So
Yeah.
definitely use those resources out there. There's all kinds of AI that can help. And then modify it. Please modify it afterwards. Which leads me to please personalize each letter of intent as much as possible. Some of them I know will come through where you're doing a statement, and it's not quite like a cover letter where you're addressing a specific person or panel. Some of them, this is part of a larger application and you're just filling out a box, as part of all the things that you're answering. But if you can, instead of making it sound like something generic you do on all your calls that you're copy pasting, the base of it maybe is, right? A lot of the things like, the kind of experience that you have and some of the qualifications, some of those things are going to be similar. Take that as your base, but then try to apply it by using some of the descriptions and words and, buzzwords and things like that that they're using in the application or in the open call and try to see how you can sprinkle them in. Again, don't be afraid to thesaurus it. Look for synonyms and don't necessarily have to use the exact words. But you definitely want to sprinkle some of those in so that when they read it, they're like, oh, this artist actually gets it. Like they actually read the call. They're not just saying, hey, I have experience. I'm good at this. Just give me the money already. It's more like, no, they actually read it and see that there's a little bit more about it. So definitely keep a lookout for those. I would actually, I'm going to add something to yours, Jackie, for a second as part of the proofreading part. Space it out, people. Please space it out. Sorry, mini rant. I have to. Sometimes I've seen these kind of things come through when I've been on the jury side of things, and it looks like a novel. All this stuff that we're talking about, break it into sections as much as you can instead of one mega paragraph. Make it easier for them to read, especially if they're going through a lot. They might be like, that looks like a really needed artist statement. Oh, wait, that's not the artist statement. That's the intent. Ooh, yeah, that's a lot of reading. So, anyways, try to break it down a little bit. And again, definitely personalize it. And part of what Jackie said about proofreading, make sure that if you're copy pasting, it doesn't have the it doesn't reference other opportunities. I've seen this come through where it's like, who are they talking about? Because that's no one on this panel, or they're talking about a specific site and it's copy pasted from another application. So
Hmm.
definitely keep an eye on all those things.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest ways to catch those, because we get it as artists, if you're especially career minded, applying for multiple applications at one time, as much as you trust your own eyes and your brain to double check things and proofread, sometimes I don't know what happens in our brains, wires get crossed, but you just don't see a specific typo, or you don't see that who the letter is written to and titled to is different than the project that's referenced in the document, right? So this is a great place to, one, as you mentioned, Adriana, lean on technology to help proofread or provide feedback, but also leaning on fellow artists, lean on your community members. If you have other artists who are applying for similar opportunities, who know kind of what the panelists are looking for, feel free to ask them to proofread or give you feedback on your application before you actually submit it, especially if they're at a similar level to you or just above you, where like you already have a working relationship with them. This can be a great way to get that constructive feedback because they understand the verbiage, they understand what people are looking for. Or even from the basic elements, if you have a friend who's a journalist or a teacher or just someone with fresh eyes, they could catch those little mistakes like that. Because ultimately, with the letter of intent, you want to be able to put your best foot forward. So by using this structure of the 5 different sections, by making sure that you proofread it for clarity and professionalism, make it personal for every call, and get feedback from fellow artists, you can ensure that your letter of intent each time you apply for jobs will get better and better and ultimately get you to the opportunities that you want to do.
At least that's what we're rooting for, right? So best of luck out there. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up with that for today's conversation, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes where you can find episode notes and links to every other podcast episode.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at Mayart across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.